I don't think there's a single answer, but you have to be able to draw on your own reserves and the wisdom of others, when anything is trying. When you're the CEO, one of my longtime colleagues has this saying that the camera is always on, the mic is always on.
That was the voice of Matt Blumberg, CEO of Markup AI, author and speaker. I'm Sarah Cole, founder of Cole Forums, a high-trust network for CEOs, general counsel and senior leaders. I'm the host of Insights from the Coalface, and through my podcast, private dinners and curated events, I bring together extraordinary leaders for honest, no-filter conversations that go far beyond the boardroom. Each episode features global experts, from neuroscientists and journalists to CEOs and ethicists, sharing bold lessons and practical strategies. We explore the science of trust and motivation, the power of communication, the role of ethical leadership, and how to balance high-stakes careers with a fulfilling life. Cole Forums creates the framework. You and your peers make the magic happen. Matt Blumberg is a multi-time founder and CEO of technology businesses over the last 30 years. He is currently CEO of Markup AI, the global leader in AI-powered content governance for enterprise. Previously, he was the founding executive of the Moviefone.com division of 777 Film, acquired by AOL, chairman and CEO of Return Path, number 2 on Fortune magazine's Best Companies to Work For list and later acquired by PSG Validity, chairman of Path Forward, a non-profit whose mission is to empower women to restart their careers after time spent focused on caregiving, and chairman and CEO of Bolster, a disruptive platform for executive search. Matt has served on a number of boards, public, private and non-profit, and he's also the author of 3 books, the link for which we'll put in the show notes. Matt Blumberg, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Sarah, it's great to see you again. Thank you so much for inviting me on.
No, I'm excited to dig in because obviously we've not been in constant contact for the last few years, but we've known each other 5 years and you've helped me off and on over the years, which I've appreciated greatly. And I've been very interested to see your recent role. Tell us a little bit about that. What are you doing right now?
Yeah, I just became the CEO of a company called Acrolinx, and I started in January. So as we're recording this, I've only been in the seat for just about a quarter. And Acrolinx is what we call instant content compliance. So the way to think about that is it's AI to check your content, not AI to create your content. So companies are using all sorts of models and tools and techniques to create content, and there's a proliferation of content like we've never seen in the world. But companies need to keep that content safe. They need to keep it on brand. They need to make sure it's not hallucinating. They need to make sure it's compliant with laws and regulations. They need to make sure it's optimized for RAG. And all kinds of things. And that is what Acrolinx does. So we have an API and agent-oriented AI solution to check content and make sure it's compliant.
What a smart niche, because there's so much stuff helping you create it, but you're so right. I mean, who's there checking that it's all correct? And listen, I've done a few faux pas in preparing for these podcasts using AI, which thankfully I've caught because I've read the content and the material that I've been
Yeah.
given. But yeah, it's easily done. So, Matt, just for our listeners, I mean, obviously I've got a little bit of insight because I know you, but how did this journey for you start? I mean, you've been a successful CEO multiple times, often with disruptive tech businesses from startup to scale up. So tell us a little bit about Matt the person and how you got into this this area.
Yeah. My first couple jobs after college, or as you would say, university, were things that I think ultimately set me up very well for the job. Uh, I was a management consultant for a couple of years. I worked in venture capital for a couple of years. And I think even, going back to when I was a kid, I was probably always interested in being an entrepreneur. My dad was an entrepreneur. Both grandfathers were as well. So I think there's something in the genes or the gene pool about it, for sure.
I love that your dad did that little bit in your book. it was just so nice that you rounded up with that, the startup CEO.
Yes, my dad wrote something in the book, and, my, work podcast, I've done 2 podcasts myself. My work one, which is called The Daily Bolster, is where I interview other CEOs, and I actually did 2 episodes with my dad, and, 1 or 2 episodes with my father-in-law as well, my wife's dad. So that's super fun. But yeah, I think I've kind of always had an itch to be, to be an entrepreneur. But it was really those first 2 jobs I had out of college. One is a management consultant where so you're sort of on the outside of a company advising them. The other in venture capital, where you're on the outside of a company investing in them. Both of those convinced me that what I really wanted to be was the person on the other side of the table, the person who was actually making things happen, not, just advising or investing.
So with that in mind, obviously, I'm gonna dwell a little bit on Return Path because that's a huge success story that sort of kicked off the journey in writing as well. I remember reading that you said, "I didn't have a clue what I was doing, and I made every mistake at least once." I love that, Matt, and it's one of the most endearing things about you is you're really easy to put your hand up and say, "Oh, I didn't get that right." But you're right, there's very little that helps people, at the start of that journey, and there's so much pressure on leaders and CEOs to get it right first time, and that never really happens in the real world, does it? So I thought your book was so helpful, not just I'm a leader of a very small business now, aren't I? So and I still found it valuable thinking around those things and how I wanted my culture, for example, to be. So with Return Path, just to sort of loop back, when did you know that was gonna be a success story? When did it start really gathering momentum?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Return Path was a 20-year journey from founding to exit. Um, and, um, I think from the beginning, we knew that there were, real needs from real customers in and around the space we had chosen. So to some extent, I, knew when I started the company that something successful was gonna come out of it. It probably wasn't until 3 or 4 years in that we really started to hit our stride, and we were solving a real problem for customers that they were willing to pay for and willing to stay with us, and then it was easier and easier to sign up new customers. So I think there was sort of an inflection point after a few years where it was like, "All right, we're clearly onto something here." Um, and then, uh, I don't think it was until like another 3, 4, 5 years had gone by before we really started seeing scale in the business, um, and sort of global scale in the business, and feeling a real tailwind, as well. And then, there were probably some other inflection points along the way. So, look, I think part of the journey of being an entrepreneur is kind of never being satisfied with where you are, and always believing that things can get bigger and better and more successful. So to some extent, the answer to your question is it was never as successful as it should have been. But the real answer is we reached different plateaus and different levels of success along the way. And from each one of those, it's sort of like if you're a mountaineer, like you climb one peak and all of a sudden you can start to see some higher peaks around you that you're interested in getting to.
So kind of what I'm hearing is a lot of resilience, maybe? Because if a mountaineer, I'm thinking it's gotta be, apart from pretty adaptive to all the things going on, but, the ups and the downs, the journey, as you put it, they can be really exhausting, can't they, for a leader?
They can be, and one of the things I always say, and I think I've blogged about this, is that, it's not just that the highs are high and the lows are low, it's that sometimes they show up at the same time. So yes, it can feel like you're on a roller coaster, but sometimes literally you'll get the best possible news you can get and the worst possible news you can get about different things at the same time, and you have to be, capable of processing that.
And what's the wisdom around that? How did you do it? How did you cope? How did you process?
Well, I don't know that there's a I don't know that there's a single answer to that. There's certainly, a cocktail of, your own kind of health and wellness, which comes from the holy trinity of sleep, diet, and exercise. And, as Stephen Covey always calls it, sharpening the saw. So make sure you have outside interests, you're not burned out, right? Make sure you kind of have the right mental frame to bring to the game. Um, I think it's also making sure that you have the right outside advisors to kind of check you on things. So sometimes that takes the form of a coach. Sometimes that takes the form of a mentor. Sometimes it takes the form of a board member or multiple board members, or a peer group of outside CEOs. And all of those things are tools in the tool belt. But I don't think there's a single answer, but you have to be able to draw on your own reserves and the wisdom of others, when anything is trying.
Because I think you once said that the CEO's biggest job is to manage their own psychology. And that really resonated with me from listening to people in the peer groups supporting each other. It's almost like a frame of mind to equip you to cope with these ups and downs, of which there are many.
It is. It's certainly true. I think, when you're the CEO, one of my longtime colleagues has this saying that the camera is always on, the mic is always on. And it's true. You are always influencing the people around you. The way you dress, whether you're late to work or early to work, how you spend money, the words you use, your facial expressions. I mean, everything everyone sees. And they're looking to you to set the tone for the organization. And if you are unable to regulate yourself, it's very hard to expect other people to regulate themselves.
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of conversation and talk around tone at the top, and you are literally the tone at the top when you're the CEO. So I completely agree. I wondered if you had a particular memory of one of those high stakes and certain moments where you did have to self-regulate and it was perhaps trickier than another time.
Many. Well, I'll give you a good one and a bad one. So, we had one of our most, or probably one of the most trying circumstances I've ever had in my career, if not the most trying, was we almost sold Return Path 2 years before we sold it. And when I say almost, I mean really almost. Uh, yeah, like we had uh, we had signed the documents ourselves. So it's not just that like someone was interested in buying the company. Like we had gone through the entire deal process and we were at the end of it and the other side pulled the plug. And I've spoken about this before publicly. Um, the trauma to myself and to the executive team and to a lot of people in the organization knew this was happening. The company was probably about 500 people at the time, and there were probably 80 that had been involved in the diligence process. So a lot of people knew this was about to happen. And when the other side pulled the plug, um, I um, I allowed myself a couple of bursts of unregulation of unregulated me, but there were even some guardrails around those. But I mean, fundamentally, I had to stand up in front of the team, the board, the company, and forge a path forward and not look back with lament. So I think actually this is part of the answer to your question that I didn't give you a minute ago, which is part of the way you manage your own psychology is actually allowing yourself to have those unregulated moments, um, but recognize them for what they are and put some guardrails around them. So the counterpoint story is one of my co-founders and very close friends uh, of Return Path, you know, had a harder time with that at that point in his career. I think he had now has a much easier time with that. And he used to come out of his office and like scream when things were going poorly, not necessarily scream at somebody, but that might have happened. That might have happened once or twice, but just, it's what, in one of my absolute favorite business books is Ben Horowitz's The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And he describes something in that book that I believe was said by a mentor of mine, and actually a former board member of mine, called the WIFIO moment, WFIO, and it stands for "We're It's Over." So every entrepreneur in the history of entrepreneurship has had those moments, right? Even the most successful companies have had, and the most successful entrepreneurs have had those moments where they're like, "Oh, we're and it's over." But you can't walk out of your office and scream that to the whole bullpen because people will believe you.
Yeah. They won't put it down to the moment. They'll actually think there's some truth. Yeah. Horrible, actually, to have the guardrails, as you say. That's one of the greatest pressures, though, isn't it? Which is where things like peer support do come in. I'm interested to hear you talk about your co-founder, and I know you're a great proponent of building the right team. And I wondered, with um, such great stakes, um, what do you look for most when you're hiring or developing that executive team?
Mm. Well, there's so many ways to answer that question. There's certainly, you know, so I'll give you two very different answers. One is anytime I'm hiring a particular executive, I think there's a myth that, that people are always saying like, "Oh, are you going for the functional expertise or the domain expertise, or are you trying to find both?" Are you just trying to find a great CFO? You're trying to find a CFO, but someone who knows your industry really well, or maybe you'll luck out and you get both. I think there's an overlooked third component, which I actually index on as highly as the other two, if not more sometimes, which is stage experience and stage transition experience. So you can have a phenomenal CFO who knows your space really well, but if they've never operated at a $5 million revenue level and that's what you are, they're not going to work out. So you really do have to look for stage transition experience, not just that they know the $5 million level, but that they know the 10 and the 15 and the 20 as well. So that's sort of one lens that I have on hiring any individual exec or all execs, that they've got to get the stage that you're at. But I'll tell you the other thing that I look for, and it kind of comes back to my philosophy about building a great team. So I'm a huge proponent of Patrick Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions model. Quite frankly, I'm a huge proponent of just about anything Pat Lencioni writes about. He's a tremendous business thinker. But the 5 dysfunctions model is sort of a pyramid or kind of a hierarchy of leadership team health. The bottom layer of the pyramid, the foundation of the pyramid, is trust. So the dysfunction is absence of trust. And obviously, then what you're trying to build is trust. And everything else that a leadership team accomplishes is built on a foundation of trust. So the other layers, which are like uh, commitment and attention to results and conflict and things like that, yes, those are all important. But that base layer is trust. And if you don't have that, then you can't move up the chain. So one of the things that I look for when I'm building an executive team and interviewing candidates to join an executive team are markers of trust. And there's not, if you're meeting someone for the first time, you don't have the opportunity to have like a 20-year history with them. You can ask them questions to uncover elements and markers of trust, and you can ask references, those things as well. For example, um, executives who feel like they have the answer all the time, probably not a good fit for my team, because I want people who have points of view, but who are open to new ideas. And that to me also sort of comes back to trust. Do you trust that the other people around this table are maybe just as smart as you and have a different experience set and can bring a different perspective to bear?
And if you're always right, that's not gonna be the case, is it?
It's not always the case. So anyway, those are a couple ways I think about hiring senior executives and building an executive team.
And all of that speaks to, I guess, the culture you're trying to create in your organization. I know from our personal interactions how highly you value culture and how much it matters to you. And I know that you've said it's not just a set of rules, it's a set of values and behaviors. and you've built award-winning workplaces, right? So I know that you've done well on building the right trust. But what's your philosophy, if you like, on culture building? What's your sort of baseline? Just for thinking of everyone listening, how they can try and adopt some of these ideas that you have.
Yeah. So let me divide the answer into two. There's culture establishment, and then there's culture scaling. And both really important topics, but they're very different topics. Um, Culture establishment has a lot to do with the founder or the CEO. And as I always say, your company has a culture whether you tell it to or not. And um, if you want to establish a culture, the sort of norms, practices, ethos of an organization, you have to steer it or it will steer itself. Um, and if there are things that you care about and that you value, um, you need to make sure that they permeate the organization. And you need to make sure that you're constantly driving them and pressing on them. And probably the most important thing you can do early on is remove people from the organization who don't have those same values. So the establishment of the culture has to be very intentional and very founder CEO driven top down. It doesn't mean that great ideas can't bubble up from the bottom. You also have to be willing to find them, spot them, elevate them. Um, but you're setting the DNA of the company when you take the reins as CEO or as founder.
That's a tough ask, though, isn't it? And I think a lot of leaders grapple with when they're results driven. Obviously, we all are as leaders, right? Especially CEOs, because you're accountable for those results. But when you have individuals who are performing well, it's the age old thing. It's really difficult if they're not a good fit to say, do you know what, you are doing very well, but you're not helping my culture, and um, you don't hold the same values and belief set as we want. Have you had those difficult conversations in the past?
All the time. And it's you can train someone on the functional aspects of their job that they don't know. It's really hard to train someone on culture. You can try. And some people are, look, most people can be moldable to some extent. If someone's really a terrible culture fit, it's unlikely that you're going to turn them into a good culture fit. And yeah, it's really hard to say goodbye to a top performer until you do it. And once you've done it and you realize that that person was bringing down everyone around them, was making good people leave, was making productive people less productive, that you realize that actually your organization's better off without them.
And it speaks to that trust point that you made as well, doesn't it? Because your team trust you to make those decisions so that everyone can enjoy coming to work, frankly.
Yeah, for sure. But something happens, and so I'll get to my second point now around scaling culture. So establishment of culture is all about the intentional workings of the founder and CEO. Scaling a culture is nothing about that. It's actually the opposite. And I think a lot of founders and CEOs don't understand this. They sort of feel like, hey, I'm the culture carrier. I'm the culture steward. And if I drove it when there were 10 people in the organization, I'm going to drive it when there are 1,000. And while it is true that you are maybe the principal culture carrier forever, the impact that you can have on 10 people when you talk to each one of them regularly is just fundamentally different than the impact you can have on 1,000 people when you still only talk to 10 or 20 of them regularly. So the practice of scaling culture is all about systematizing the values. So the CEO can be intentional about creating the values and driving the values early on, but then the CEO has to partner with the people leader and quite frankly, with all leaders in the business to systematize the culture so that it's not about one person, but it's about the lattice work of having hundreds or thousands of people be stewards of the culture. And the way you do that is very simple. It is you have to weave your values and your culture into every touch point in the employee life cycle. So if you have values, they better be in the interview process. You better be interviewing against those values on the way in. And that's not about you. That's about the person in HR who develops the scorecard for interviewing new candidates. It's about someone figuring out what questions you ask to figure out if that value is present, that value is present, that value is present, how you do references, right? So interviewing is one. You have to weave it into the onboarding process. So when someone is joining a company, they're in their first few months, um, it can't just be that onboarding is that IT gives you your laptop and someone in HR makes you watch a sexual harassment video. Like, you have to train people on the values and you have to make them feel the values when they show up at work every day and when they show up at work on their first day. So if one of your values, for example, is be welcoming, I actually think this was one of our values at Return Path. It was something close to that. Um, and someone shows up at work on their first day and their desk is perfectly set up. The computer is there, it's on with their own login. Their swag bag is there, so they get the company shirt and hat and backpack. There's a handwritten note from their manager or the CEO welcoming them to the company, and there's an invitation for lunch with their team, right? Just to, like, pick some things. Like, yeah, you're living the value of being welcoming. If you have a value that says be welcoming and someone shows up on their first day and no one's expecting them and their computer isn't ready yet, and then no, you're not going to scale that value, right? So employee touch points are critical. So again, I'm not going to go into that level of detail with all of them, but if you have values, you should be promoting against them, compensating against them, reviewing people against them, firing people against them. Every touch point in the employee life cycle is an opportunity to reinforce those values. So creating it might be about you, but scaling it is about everybody.
On the scaling point, though, I'm going to challenge you a little bit there because I saw firsthand. I mean, it wasn't a company of 1,000, but it was around 500. You, I believe, interviewed nearly everybody. Certainly in, the majority of the people in that company. And it showed a level of authenticity that I had not come across and probably haven't since, to be honest. Did that approach serve you well, do you think? I mean, obviously, my impression was that it did because I valued that. But is that something that you learned from or that you wouldn't now do?
No, 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 that was incredibly important, but that's actually, not an answer to the same question, that's an answer to a different question. So how you establish values and how you scale values are different than how you onboard yourself as a new CEO to an existing organization.
But you were living the values from day one is my point, because you were do you see what I mean? That from the perspective of everyone else.
I was living my values, but part of what I was doing was trying to discover what the organization's values were. And, the only way to do that was to get primary data, and to actually talk to each person. And I did that when I joined my current company, Acrolinks, as well. Probably fewer people, 150, 160, and I did one-on-ones with every single person. And one of the things you learn when you do that, you get to meet people, that's great, and they get to see you and see that you're a real normal human. Um, but you also, depending on what questions you ask and how you go about those conversations, what you learn is what is how the values of the organization are lived and whether they're real or whether they're not real. Sometimes those values were written by the CEO or written by HR, but they're not actually the lived values of the organization. And sometimes, some of them are and some of them aren't. But the only way you get to understand that is if you actually, are collecting that primary data by talking to individuals.
Yeah, and it was a very real thing to do. I mean, I just thinking about leadership and your views on leadership strengths, do things like, I don't know, vulnerability and authenticity, they rank really high for you? Or, yeah, I that was my impression when we met and how we've got to know each other. But I just wondered how they play out as a CEO then?
I mean, for me, those are some of the bases of trust. So I'll come back to that, to the Pat Lencioni pyramid. And, trust is the basis of everything. It's the basis of strong human relationships. And whether you're talking about trust between you and a small team, like a leadership team, or whether you're talking about trust between you and a broader organization, if people don't feel like they're looking at the real you, if people don't feel like they're hearing the truth, then they won't trust you. So for me, there is only one way um, to succeed as a leader, which is through authenticity and vulnerability. Now, there are plenty of leaders that are not authentic and not vulnerable, and some of them have built and run very successful businesses, for sure. I would say those businesses lack organizational health, and they might be succeeding for other reasons. Like you can have the right product and market at the right time and push hard enough that you can build a really successful business. But it's not the kind of company I'd ever want to work in.
And we know from recent data it's not the kind of company that the people who are coming into the, employment pool now are interested in either. So um, I think it was the Endelman Trust, um, data that's just come out has exactly said what you've just said, which is they're looking for trust as one of their top metrics.
And they're looking for purpose also. And purpose is a little bit hard to define sometimes in for-profit ventures, in ways that are easy to communicate and easy for people to get their arms around. And I always said, like, I'd love to run a company that's saving the world. It's actually saving the world, right? That's actually saving lives or curing cancer or keeping the planet from bursting into flames. Because then your purpose is very obvious and you don't need to do work to articulate it. But most companies, they're not doing that. They're doing something that's one step removed or two steps removed. And one of the things you have to do as a CEO is uncover that purpose and make sure that that the purpose feels real and is real, uh, and um, and ultimately help people connect the dots between their job and that purpose.
It brings a purpose to life sort of thing for those who are joining.
It does.
And it kind of loops back to one of the things I loved about your book, The Startup CEO, because obviously that's relevant to me now because I'm starting my own organization, so I've revisited it, was the 4 questions that you ask yourself at the end. I love that. Question 1, am I having fun at work? I'm paraphrasing, but we'll get there. Question 2, am I learning and growing as a professional? Question 3, is my work financially rewarding enough? And question 4, am I having the impact I want to have on the world? To your purpose point. I love those questions, and they've actually served me well, for a number of years since I first read them in lots of situations around, you know, what am I doing with my life? And and is this the direction I want to be traveling in? Great questions, but I think really relevant to leaders. I mean, thinking about the peer support groups, and to your point, I feel I have a huge purpose in those because by helping CEOs do a better job and leading their organizations in a better way, then obviously I'm impacting on all sorts of industry sectors, charities, the lot. So it's very rewarding. But what led you to those 4 questions? Was it um, a long line of um, junctures where you thought, am I rewarded in this role? Am I enjoying it? Am I getting the best from it?
I think it was probably a couple of years where I was unhappy with where I was that led me to ask questions about why am I unhappy and what's going on that probably helped me shape those questions. So, yeah, I mean, those are 4 questions I kinda ask myself at the end of every calendar year just because that's a readily available checkpoint, for such things. Um, and, um, uh, and it's also, it's just an opportunity to pull up and say, like, "Hey, are things moving in the right direction for me?" And if they're not, why not? Like, where are things breaking down in the process? And therefore, what do I need to work on in the coming year? Um, so it's not that you have to say check, 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 check to all 4 every year. But if you're not saying check to at least two and a half of them, you might not be in the right place. And if you are, um, if you're saying check to three of them, but not four, then so let's look at the fourth. Maybe it is that you are learning and growing and you're having a blast and you're having impact, but you're not making money. And that's important to you. Well, is something changed there? Like, is money now more important to you than it used to be? Or are you just undercompensated for where you are in life? These are not questions for CEOs, by the way. These are questions for all of us. If the answer to three of them is yes, but the no is against, am I learning and growing? Most humans thrive in environments where they're slightly out of their comfort zone, where they're being challenged, where they're learning and growing. And if you're not, how do you change that? And maybe the answer is you can't change it at work. So how do you change it in your personal life? Go pick a new hobby. Learn how to do something you've never learned before. Build some new muscle.
And I think you, to your point on the financials, you made a point in the book. I think that if you were kind of the corporate hero and you were 25 and you were only taking X amount every year to help your startup, that might not be as easy to do when you're 35 and you've got a mortgage and kids. And I thought that was just such a real point because in the real world, that's exactly, the dilemmas we're faced with are often personal ones, aren't they?
That's right. And they're dynamic. And that's the point of having that checkpoint to ask yourself those questions, because what was true 6 months ago or 12 months ago might not be true now.
And you've also said that the best CEOs are decisive, even if the decision turns out to be imperfect. And I think it felt like you are always reviewing, you know, as you consider it to be integral to being a good CEO and a good person, maybe even, is that you're reflecting, taking on feedback, all of those things. And you even said earlier you were looking at it when you were hiring someone who's open to other points of view. Do you think as a CEO that's absolutely key as well to being open like that?
I, I think it is. I mean, look, you have to be willing to learn from what happens around you and learn from the actions that you take and your company takes. Um, and it sort of comes back to the point of you're not right all the time. You're just, even the smartest and most successful people in the world are not right all of the time. And and they have to be willing to hear that and to see that. And it's not just you have to be willing to hear it when someone says it to you. You have to be willing to see it. When you make a decision and the impact is negative, you can't have to wait for someone to tell you that. You have to actually see it and do the cause effect yourself. And even, I'm in the middle of reading Walter Isaacson's Elon Musk biography right now, which is a great read. Um, and, talk about someone who thinks he's right all the time. And he is also willing for data to convince him that he might be wrong.
So even somebody who feels they're right, at least they're open to data showing them that they might be wrong. I just wonder when you were talking about, culture and how that's different when you're scaling. Are there other major differences, apart from the obvious, around leading a startup when it's in that sort of scrappy startup mode, I guess, and then the scaling up and then the maturity? I mean, do you have to have a very different outlook when you're in each of those phases? Or are you still basically the same approach?
There are some elements of your approach that must be present at all stages. Uh, and you have to recognize that your job changes. So let me tell you about one of my favorite business practices, personal practices that I learned from another CEO in the last year. A friend of mine also, has kind of run similarly sized businesses in our sector, um, who has this great routine he does at the end of every year. Um, so it's sort of his parallel to my four questions. He writes a letter that he never delivers, right? But he writes a letter to his board resigning and explaining why he's resigning. And then he writes a job description that they should use to hire his replacement. So if you think about that exercise as an intellectual exercise, you are forcing yourself to articulate the most important reason why you're unhappy in your job And then you're actually writing the list of things that the job requires going forward, not the list of things that you do every day.
Yeah, not today, but the next phase almost.
And and those two things together are very, very powerful moments of reflection. And this is a roundabout way of answering your question, which is, yeah, what you do as a CEO every day, the activities, the things on your plate differ from a raw startup to a scale up to a mature company. And you have to be able to understand what those are. There are some things that kind of look the same, but they're different at bigger scale. There's some things that are just actually different. But there are, I think some traits of successful leaders that you want to carry from stage to stage to stage. Like you have to.
And you've spoken about your 4 questions tool and now your friend's tool of writing the letter. Are there any other sort of decision-making frameworks or tools that you've relied on? I don't know, whether it's just day-to-day running or when you're facing real decision markers.
I mean, there's sort of an infinite number
We could be here all day
of
talking about
frameworks
them,
that,
Brie.
yeah, that I've used over the years. Uh, and, I would say, I'll give you a little bit of a non-answer. But one of the things that I've come to appreciate is that there's a big difference between a framework and a playbook. And there are a lot of my previous company, Bolster, was in the executive recruiting space. So I spent a lot of time talking to senior executives and being in the middle of that hiring process, even though it wasn't for me. And the hiring CEOs are always seduced by the playbook. This person that I want for my CMO, my open CMO role, they have the playbook. They were just at a company that went from my size to 10 times my size, and boy, was it successful, and they know exactly what to do. And my answer to that is always a very resounding bullshit. So that doesn't mean that the experience is not valid. The experience is incredibly valid. But to assume that your situation is the same as that company's situation and that what you are experiencing today requires exactly the same set of decisions and vendors and processes, it's just folly. It just doesn't work that way. What you want is someone that can have an experience or a playbook and extrapolate it to a framework. What were the decisions we made at different points along the way, and why did we make them? What were the things that we looked at in order to make that decision? So that's what you want. You want someone who has frameworks, who can apply them to different situations, whatever the situation is.
And I think what's valuable to our listeners is, look, you've taken things from seed stage to $100 million revenue, probably more. And I'm really in awe, really, of how you've, if you like, taken disruptive companies. They seem to be your sweet spot, Matt, and really innovated. And I think one of the things that comes up time and time again with CEOs is, how do we innovate? How do we generate innovative companies? What's your experience of that? I mean, what would you say is the sort of secret sauce, if there is one, for that?
Yeah. So I think there are a couple of really important things about innovation, in my view. One is that innovation is not just about the product you sell. So yes, you have to have a good product in the market, and it probably needed to be invented, and there needed to be change, or you're in a new category, et cetera. So innovation of product is very important. But innovation is not only the realm of the product department. You can innovate anything. You can innovate your HR, your people practices. You can innovate the way your accounting team does the monthly close. You can literally innovate anything. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs, particularly in tech, are so focused on product that they forget that they can apply those talents that they have to other areas of the business as well. So that's the first thing I would say is like innovation can permeate the entire organization, not only product. But the second thing is also really important, which is that innovation never has an end point. Things can always be improved and things can always get better. And one of the areas where a lot of not just founders and CEOs, but executives struggle is that sometimes the thing you have to innovate, the thing you have to tear down and start over is something that you built yourself. And it could be because your company is now a larger company than it used to be. So whatever that process is or that system is that you put in place is no longer working. It could be that time has marched on and the industry has changed. Whatever it is, you have to be willing as a leader to tear down your own work and build it back up again differently. And that is so hard for most people. It's really easy to disrupt somebody else's thing. It's really hard to disrupt your own. I mean, that's sort of the classic Clay Christensen innovator's dilemma, right? It's why big companies struggle with disruptive innovation at the bottom.
Because they are already agile and they're formative, whereas you're having to maybe undo stuff that you've done. That's your point, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think another one of your massive strengths that I've observed is basically communication. I mean, you've done podcasts yourself multiple times, and you're an amazing communicator in terms of the concept. I mean, I I'm in awe sometimes of your descriptive abilities. Do you think that's really helped you, not just with the product, as you say, but with articulating your company's purpose, I guess, so that it resonates with consumers?
Well, thank you, first of all. It's very kind of you to say. I think the answer is a resounding yes. I think a huge percentage of a CEO's job or a leader's job in general is storytelling. You are always you're always selling something. You're always trying to bring someone along with you for the ride, whether it's a prospective employee, a current employee, a shareholder or prospective shareholder, a customer or prospective customer. It's not that you're always in like kind of oily sales mode, but you're always trying to articulate a vision of the future and give someone a reason to do something with you. So, sharp communication skills are really critical for leadership.
I think just listening to you speak about all the different positive things that you think a leader should have, I wondered, was there one sort of leadership misconception that really winds you up and that you wish more people understood?
Yeah, I think it's that the best leaders are the ones who have lots of tools in the tool belt and know when to use each one. So I think there's a misconception, which is, oh, this person is too consensus oriented, or this person is too authoritative, or this person is too much of a pace setter. Like there are lots of leadership styles in this particular example. Um, and actually, the best leaders are ones that have all of those things and know how to be all of those things and know when to exercise each one. So yeah, you don't want someone who's consensus oriented all the time. You don't just like you don't want someone who's a pace setter all the time. But the same leader can be both at different times.
As and when needed.
Yeah.
Our time sadly is coming to an end, and I'm disappointed because I've got loads of things I want to continue to ask you. But I suppose what might be really interesting to the listeners is to ask you what excites you most about the future of leadership and entrepreneurship um, in such an AI powered, let's say, values conscious world as well.
Well, uh, I mean, look, I would say it's that leadership matters more than ever. and humanity matters more than ever. And just because machines can do more and more and more things, and I mean, if you're a CEO and you're not using AI every day, multiple times a day yourself, you are missing a depth of understanding of how transformational this technology is. But just because machines can do more and more and more things, that does not discount the importance of strong leadership and strong thinking leadership. It actually makes that more important. Uh, and so that's what I think is exciting about being a leader in this time where more and more things are becoming more transactional.
Perfect. And one question I have to ask you, because I'm asking everyone before you leave us today, is what three things would you put into a leader's survival toolkit?
Perhaps a bottle of Xanax would be a good start. Um, Let me give you three leadership axioms or traits or something, as opposed to um, a bottle of anti-anxiety medication. One is just to never lose focus on the customer and on solving real problems for real customers. There are a lot of first-time CEOs, particularly when times are frothy in the capital markets. There are a lot of first-time CEOs, when you ask them how their business is going, all they talk about is, well, they're the Series A, and if I do this, I get the Series B, and if I do this, I get the Series C, and then I exit. And it's not about that. It's about creating value, and it's about solving a real problem for a customer. So just never forget that is number one. I think number two is what I said a moment ago, which is be prepared to innovate everything and anything all the time. Even the stuff that you yourself built and created. And the third one I would say is, this sort of concept of founder mode that everyone's been talking about the last year or so. What I would say is that founder mode is not sustainable for you or for your company if you never leave it. So founder mode is really important. It is an important tool in the tool belt. But the bigger your organization gets, the more you need to focus on multiplying talent and training leaders than being the hands-on pace setter yourself. So, most founders, they have moments of founder mode all the time, and that doesn't go away, and that's okay. That's what makes them great leaders. Again, read the Steve Jobs biography, read the Elon Musk biography. Like, they go in and out of that. But when they are doing nothing but founder mode all day, every day, it burns themselves out, and it burns everyone around them out.
Matt Blumberg, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Sarah, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for inviting me on.
That's it for today's episode of Insights from the Coalface, Elevating Leadership Beyond the Boardroom. I hope this conversation left you with fresh insights, new perspectives, and a deeper connection to the challenges and opportunities of leadership. If you found value in today's discussion, I'd love for you to share it with your network, leave a review, or reach out to me with your thoughts. Leadership can be a lonely road, but it doesn't have to be. Let's keep learning, growing, and supporting each other. Until next time, stay resilient, stay authentic, and keep leading with purpose.